Welcome back to the Machine Commons Consulting Podcast. We're MCC, the new partnership between the Machine Commons Collective and Steve's Combined Intelligence over in the UK.
Nice to be here, and thank you, Alex.
We've started this mini-series to help you understand more about artificial intelligence and how it's relevant to your business already. We've talked about connecting AI to vision and how it's so important to make any initiative in your business connect to your overarching goals and strategy. We've talked about the future of work and how human beings will be working alongside artificial intelligences in order to be better at what they do. Today, we've got a super exciting episode. We're talking about the types of AI that are already out there and available to use today. It's not so much just about customized software building, it's about leveraging what already exists. Yeah, so we're sort of dancing in this in-between ground between fully customized solutions and completely off-the-shelf solutions. We're talking about tried and tested methods that exist, but do need sort of a degree of customization in order to make them work. Is that right?
Today we'll discuss the 5 forms of AI. That ranges from AI-infused applications, systems that are specifically around people interaction, process automation technologies, augmented analytics, which is bringing in analytics and data and insight with AI. And then the last category is the custom AI, the machine learning, the how do we build something that's unique type capability. So you have what you might call AI-infused applications. So that's systems, if you take enterprise applications like CRM or ERP, for example, where the supplier's built a AI capability within them. That might be around customer understanding in CRM. It might be, detecting financial transaction anomalies, for example, in an ERP system. It might be, an e-commerce capability around how you guide customers to buy new things, for example. And that sort of capability that exists, and it's really about enabling organizations to use that.
Yeah, we had the absolute privilege to work across a really interesting AI-infused business application for AstraZeneca, actually. Pharmaceuticals is, at least in part, a sales-based business. They need to understand who their audience is and what they care about in order to be able to influence them. They basically wanted to graph the entire industry, providing their sales staff with information that they need in order to nudge their target market in the right direction in favor of the molecules that they were pushing. It was nearly 100 molecules that they were talking about. And you're mapping an entire industry of doctors, you're mapping publications, you're mapping all sorts of things, social media networks, who's connected to who cites who in different articles, and building this huge network graph. And then the output from a business perspective is pretty simple. It's, hey, you should talk to so-and-so about such and such because they care about it. Those sorts of intelligences, artificial intelligences, already exist. And all that is required to infuse them into your business is a little bit of custom engineering. And that's kind of where we came in.
You then have sort of 4 other categories, sort of people interaction. That's anything from virtual assistants through chatbots through, document processing, for example, all the bits around interacting with people and how technology is now doing that better. I think the interesting one around people interaction is probably, rather than specifically an example, is to talk a little bit about how technology and people, that interaction is evolving. For many years, we've interacted with technology through keyboards. It's now moving to a point where we interact with technology through voice. And that capability will be enhancing quite dramatically over the coming years as these large cloud natural language processing and understanding platforms are providing much greater ability to interpret what we want and provide us the right answer. And if you anticipate that capability and the growth of what's going to happen there, in the future, are we going to still have large customer service teams, for example, that are dealing with a lot of relatively straightforward questions? Or will we now have, bots or whatever we want to call them, voice assistants that actually provide a lot of those capabilities and then hand over to people, when there's a specialist need for something that's new or different. Take Alexa, for example. It's a sort of one sentence interaction. The change here is you'll hold a conversation and you'll be able to interact and maintain the context of that conversation to actually achieve an outcome in the
Yeah,
future.
we've seen a couple of those sorts of cases in the collective actually, where such as for new employee onboarding, where there are going to be questions and their questions need to be understood by a system in order to present, hopefully, the right material. We've seen it in law firms and professional environments where all of their systems are scanned and then it's sort of like a search function. Instead of just providing results based on the keywords, for example, it's providing results based on sentiment. And I think something that many people who don't directly work technically in the field might not know is that most of the major players have already gone to huge efforts to train these algorithms. They've they've scanned millions, if not billions, of examples on the internet in order to curate these algorithms which are better suited to language processing tasks, for example. And these tools are they're not open source, but they're openly available for
Mhm.
the smallest of boutique consultants in order to use. So equipped with the right tooling, you don't even need a particularly powerful computer. A custom machine learning engineer has access to some of the most powerful algorithms on the planet, trained by some of the best and biggest companies and minds. So it's fascinating what is available to literally anyone. It would be equivalent to the first word processing unit suddenly being available, and now everyone was able to type online and to store digital copies of things and then print things indefinitely. Similarly, this infrastructure of algorithms and of capability is just available to everybody, and that's what's so interesting about it.
Yeah, and I think that's it. A lot of AI is driven by these very large organizations, whether it's your Amazons or your Googles or your Teslas or wherever. Um, but they're building capabilities, and in many cases, they're building capability that is actually available to be used by every other business as well. And that's part of their business model for doing that. That's the route to consider. Piggyback off what is innovative, large scale from these big organizations and use it in your own business context.
Mm.
Process automation is a key one. How are we automating end-to-end business processes using advanced technologies? Not just things like robotic process automation, but building AI onto that to understand things like free text and so on to make more intelligent decisions and bring that capability. Over the last sort of 5 years or so, there's been a big push around robotic process automation or low code, no code platforms and how you can automate internal processes within a business.
Mm.
Where AI is enabling it to go further is, it's removing some of the blockages that they used to exist. So, in a rules-based system, as soon as you start running into unstructured data, whether that's, a free-form text email, for example, from a customer, then the system can't cope.
Mm.
Now, with technologies like AI, it can start to understand the meaning and what that customer wants, for example, in that email, and actually using that to make decisions on what the automation is now going to do. So suddenly you go from, we still live in a world where 80% of data is unstructured and only 20% is structured. But we suddenly go to a world where actually a lot of things which would have had to kick off to a person to read and interpret can now actually be done by technology. And yes, there
Mm.
will still be scenarios where it's complex, will pass to a person, but we're broadening now what can be achieved through automation and the functions and the operations it can actually achieve throughout the business, whatever it is, from finance and invoice processing through to that
Mm.
whole customer engagement piece. So a lot of opportunity there to broaden what's being achieved and enhance business efficiency and offer new capabilities as well.
Yeah, you mentioned invoice processing. It sort of combines with the first category of business systems. We had one of our suppliers. In fact, they spun this off to be its own independent business. That the very simple function of being able to take a photo of an invoice or of, for example, I think this one actually might have been in luggage, but the incorporation of AI to and computer vision to recognize different text fields specific to that client. So it's not like this is like an Apple product, right? It's a bespoke iOS application, iOS Android application, which can scan, say, luggage or invoice, sort of handwritten invoice or luggage tickets, and then it can incorporate that into a system, and then you can have little robots, little robot processors automating the transfer of that information into other systems and propagating around the business to where it needs to be. So I suppose the point here is that these categories aren't necessarily distinct, and they do actually often ladder up on top of one another. And I think robotic process automation is a really good example, because it's one of those things that machine learning enables more RPA units. And then the more RPA units, the more data logs that you've got. And that then in turn enables more sort of machine learning analytics processing. And then it's this huge virtuous cycle. And this is, again, kind of stacking back to your core point a couple of episodes ago, Steve, of just having AI centric to company vision, because that once you start holding it at the center of things, it's just incredible how many different ways it can interconnect and improve and create these sort of little virtuous cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had, organizations have had people at the heart of their businesses, but with AI, we're actually trying to simulate some of the capabilities of that human workforce in our digital workforce. And if you start thinking it of that way, well, you go, well, we center our organization, what we're doing around our people. Actually, we've now got a technology here that we should also form part of that center and realize that our business needs to evolve and support that capability, as well as evolving what the sort of human workforce will do for us.
Yeah, and we actually interviewed an RPA consultancy on the Machine Commons audio podcast, and he said the road to adoption can be a little bit long, and before they enter the building, they can be met with a little bit of resistance and fear. But when they focused in, the step one is to actually outline what are your processes. And we had a little bit of a laugh about this, because we realized, or at least this was their experience and certainly my experience, that most people, or many people in a role, kind of don't even know what they do. I mean, that if they've never taken a moment to stop, write down their processes, it's never just your job description. If you were to fall off the face of the planet and someone was to be brought in to do just your job description, how many small tasks would be kind of forgotten? So step one is to figure out what your processes are, and that alone is a valuable exercise. And then step two is to just focus on either an individual person, and this is from an RPA consultancy perspective, is to either focus on an individual person or a very small team and get these little robots working really well there. And there's such little cost or risk to doing that, because you're sort of controlling the potential damage. And sometimes in the development of any automation, as anyone who's ever tried to automate anything on their computer knows, they can often sort of go wrong. And the way that RPA consultants have adapted to this is by controlling the kind of the risk of damage. And by controlling this risk of damage, they can create really successful little RPA robots that first run across one person's desk. And then when that's successful, it runs across other people's desks. Soon enough, you've got that team, which is outpacing every other team, because all of a sudden they don't have to file their invoices or send across X, Y, or Z paperwork, because it's sort of done for them. And the way to adopt these sort of technologies is kind of experimental. And I think this is important to remember, that some of this stuff, it's not tried and tested in the same way that you would expect some physical service. Like, if you have a plumber come over, and he can either fix the sink or he can't, right? But with highly innovative technology, there's always going to be a degree of experimentation, of sort of trying one thing, seeing what happens, controlling the risks, tweaking variables, changing things. And this is very much how certainly RPA seems to be adopted successfully, and then over 5 or 10 years rolls out across the entire organization and completely changes the game.
Yeah, and I must admit, I could talk for a long time about RPA and automation, and back to the conversation you were talking about earlier about the vision side of things. That gives you your immediate benefit from adopting those technologies. But actually, if you start to consider your business is centered around how humans used to do things, you now need to consider it around in the future. We've got this combination of technology and people. How should the organization be structured? What functions do we still need? Which ones do we no longer need, actually, because the technology will do it for us? Number four, augmented analytics.
Okay, Steve, what is augmented analytics? Are we talking specifically predictive analytics here? Are we talking the automations of data sets and analysis? What exactly is augmented analytics?
Well, officially, it's the combination of what you might call traditional analytics with artificial intelligence. What I like to look at it is it's all about extracting value from data. Ultimately, organizations have gathered typically a lot of data. That might be data about their products, it might be data about their customers, their transactions over what might be a prolonged period. It might be bespoke sensor data, for example. How do we look at that data? How do we analyze what might be vast quantities of data that is traditionally beyond what a human being might want to try and analyze because the volumes are so great? We can use augmented analytic capabilities to extract insight. And some of that might be predictive, some of that might be saying, well, okay, we've seen this trend, we forecast now that this is going to happen. And ideally, we might want to start pulling out, well, if we were to do X, this would mean Y, and this could add extra value. So it's really about that value from data and how to make the most use of it.
Super interesting. And so I suppose that brings us to our final category, which is custom AI. Well, you wouldn't walk out of a clothes shop with a t-shirt that was too big for you or a pair of trousers that was too small. And I think that's very much the metaphor for customized AI. It's got to be relevant. It's got to be appropriate for your business. It has to fit.
Ultimately, this is everything to do with AI. So this is machine learning, it's deep learning, it's convolution neural network. So there's a lot of breadth and complexity within that space. Yes, there is the opportunity for businesses to create their own machine learning team if they want to, but it is an advanced capability that may be beyond what a lot of organizations can really afford to do. And the opportunity is there if organizations want to build that capability, is to build solutions from scratch. What we typically suggest is that a lot has been done out there by a lot of different organizations, and we've got a collective of 80 different organizations here to build specialist capabilities, whether that's a combination of skills and solutions within different unique spaces. And that can be anywhere from finance to manufacturing to customer engagement. So, a lot of these organizations have built something that's already worked and delivered value for certain clients in certain spaces. It's about tweaking and adjusting, and in our case, machine learning and training to make that work in the context of every individual's business. And I would strongly recommend that everyone sort of utilizes that capability and that experience, both from a skill set and a solutions perspective, as the starting point rather than the do it from scratch point. That's a much quicker way of achieving value for the business.
So then it becomes a matter of selecting the right consultant, the right supplier for your specific challenge. And this is where the joy of custom machine learning comes in, because they have that relevant experience, whether it's in defect recognition, if it's in time series analysis, if you're trying to automate some of your processes, if you've got predictive analytics requirements, or almost no matter what it is, you can scan hundreds of different case studies, and in each case, a supplier has successfully delivered this system, and the custom engineering bit comes into specifying that solution to your industry and to your business.
A lot closer to start from someone who's already done it all
Mm, mm.
in a slightly different context and then tailor that to the particular context of that client than it is to say, well, let's just start from, a machine learning Python notebook.
It's funny what you just said made me think of a quote from one of the interviews, which was, has something to do with like not reinventing the wheel. Like the first thing that any engineering consultant does is scan is research arxiv for the most up-to-date machine learning algorithms, or research previous cases that have been published anywhere, and they'll just kind of see what everyone else has been doing, and then they'll sort of borrow the best bit, stitch it together in a customized way, and deliver it to their client.
Yeah, and I think that is one element about custom AI. I've worked with a number of clients where we're not just using one AI capability, we're actually combining together several,
Mm.
typically with non AI capabilities as well. And it's that combination that's really delivering something unique, something of real value, some differentiator for the business. And I think, bear that in mind. A lot of complex AI solutions, if you take autonomous vehicles, for example, there's a whole host of different AI capabilities built in there. It's not just one super brain, it's multiple different capabilities to build that capability in there.
And on that note, arguably the human brain isn't so different. We're comprised of lots of different distinct regions which all have kind of specific bits, and then there are components which layered up upon that, which then kind of stitches it all together to give this wonderful experience of you watching this podcast with us today. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Steve and I have loved going through a few different examples. You should check out Steve's article if you haven't read it already. But otherwise, thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Contact information is on the screen right now. Don't hesitate to get in touch.